The night Isabella Reneth's billion-dollar empire nearly crumbled wasn't in a boardroom. It was in a dark Manhattan alley where three armed men dragged her toward a van that would have made her disappear forever. What saved her wasn't money or power, but a struggling single father who happened to be in the wrong place at exactly the right time. The Metropolitan Opera House gleamed like a jewel against Manhattan's velvet sky, its golden lights casting long shadows across Lincoln Center's plaza. Inside, Puccini's La Bohème was reaching its tragic crescendo, but Isabella Reneth had already slipped away from her private box. The irony wasn't lost on her. Another story of love and loss, another reminder of emotions she'd long since buried beneath quarterly reports and hostile takeovers. At 34, Isabella commanded a tech empire worth $12 billion. Reneth Dynamics had revolutionized everything from artificial intelligence to renewable energy, making her the youngest woman ever to grace Forbes's cover twice in 1 year. But tonight, walking alone through the Opera House's marble corridors, she felt the weight of that success pressing down like a physical force. The Armani gown she wore cost more than most people's cars, yet it felt like armor, beautiful, expensive, and utterly isolating. Her heels clicked against the polished floor with military precision, each step echoing the rhythm of a life lived in perfect, calculated control. Ms. Reneth. Her assistant's voice crackled through her earpiece. Your car is waiting at the artist entrance. Security says the main exit has too many photographers. Isabella touched the nearly invisible device, her fingers brushing against diamond earrings that had once belonged to a Russian Tsarina. Thank you, Marcus. I'll be right there. And the artist entrance led through a narrow alley that connected the Opera House to West 65th Street. It was a route she'd taken dozens of times before, a shortcut that avoided the paparazzi who seemed to multiply like bacteria whenever she appeared in public. Tonight felt different, though. The October air carried a sharp bite that made her pull her coat tighter, and something in the shadows seemed to shift and whisper. Isabella Reneth had built her fortune on calculated risks, but she'd never been one to believe in premonitions. Perhaps she should have been. The alley stretched ahead like a tunnel lit by a single security lamp that cast everything in harsh, unforgiving angles. Her footsteps seemed unnaturally loud, bouncing off brick walls that had witnessed a century of secrets. Halfway through, she heard the first sound that didn't belong, a car door closing somewhere behind her. She didn't turn around. In her world, paranoia was a luxury she couldn't afford. CEOs who jumped at shadows didn't survive long enough to build empires. The second sound was closer. Footsteps, multiple sets moving with the kind of synchronized precision that spoke of training and purpose. This time she did glance back, and her blood turned to ice. 3 men in dark clothing were approaching from the Opera House entrance, moving with the predatory grace of wolves closing in on prey. Their faces were obscured by shadows, but there was something in their posture, professional, patient, deadly, that made every instinct in her body scream. Isabella had faced down senators, oil executives, and tech moguls who would have gladly seen her destroyed. She'd weathered congressional hearings, SEC investigations, and assassination attempts on her character that would have broken lesser people. But this was different. This was immediate, physical, and terrifyingly real. She quickened her pace, her heels now striking the pavement with staccato urgency. The alley exit seemed impossibly far away, a rectangle of yellow streetlight that might as well have been another planet. Behind her, the footsteps matched her rhythm, staying exactly the same distance, back close enough to catch her if she ran far enough to avoid drawing attention from anyone who might glance into the alley. Her phone was in her purse, but her hands were shaking too badly to find it. The earpiece that connected her to Marcus had gone silent, either from distance or interference she didn't want to contemplate. For the first time in her adult life, Isabella Reneth was completely, utterly alone. Ms. Reneth. The voice came from directly behind her, cultured and calm, with the slight accent she couldn't immediately place. Please stop walking. She didn't stop. If anything, she moved faster, her mind racing through possibilities. The street was just ahead. There would be people, traffic, witnesses, safety in the chaos of New York City's endless motion. A hand touched her shoulder, and she spun around with a gasp that echoed off the brick walls. The man was tall, pale, with the kind of sharp features that belonged in European fashion magazines. His suit was expensive, but understated, and his eyes held the flat, emotionless quality of someone who had done terrible things without losing sleep. "My name is Viktor Kozlov," he said as if they were being introduced at a cocktail party. "I represent certain interests that would like to have a conversation with you." "I don't have conversations in alleys with men I don't know," Isabella replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "If your interests want to meet, they can call my office like everyone else." Victor smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "I'm afraid this matter requires more immediate attention." The other two men had moved to flank her, cutting off any chance of retreat. One was massive, with the build of a heavyweight boxer and hands that looked capable of crushing steel. The other was smaller, but somehow more frightening, wiry, and quick, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested violence was always just beneath the surface. "Your recent acquisition of Meridian Defense Systems," Victor continued conversationally, "has created some complications for my employers. They believe a private discussion about your future plans would be mutually beneficial." Isabella's mind raced. Meridian was a military contractor she'd purchased 3 months ago, a move that had given Reneth Dynamics access to advanced weapons technology and government contracts worth hundreds of millions. It had also made her enemies among people who preferred to keep such capabilities in more traditional hands. "Who do you work for?" she asked, buying time while her eyes searched for escape routes that didn't exist. "People who value privacy above all else," Victor replied. "People who believe that certain technologies should remain in certain hands. Your company's recent innovations in autonomous defense systems have attracted unwanted attention." The weight of understanding settled over her like a shroud. This wasn't about money or corporate espionage. This was about power, the kind that nations killed for and corporations buried people to protect. "And if I refuse to have this conversation?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Victor's smile became genuinely warm, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "Ms. Reneth, I think you misunderstand the nature of this invitation. You see, you're going to have this conversation regardless. The only question is whether you walk to the car or whether my associates carry you." The larger man stepped forward, and Isabella caught a glimpse of something metallic beneath his jacket. Not a gun, something smaller, more specialized. A syringe, perhaps, or a taser. Something designed to incapacitate without causing permanent damage, at least not immediately. "This is kidnapping," she said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "Do you have any idea who I am? What this will cost you?" "We know exactly who you are." The smaller man spoke for the first time, his voice high and reedy with an accent she couldn't place. "That's why we're here." Victor checked his watch, a Patek Philippe, that probably cost more than most people made in a year. "Ms. Reneth, we really do need to be going. My employers don't appreciate delays." The van appeared at the mouth of the alley, as if summoned by his words. Dark, windowless, with license plates that were probably stolen or fabricated. The engine ran smooth and quiet, professionally maintained by people who understood that reliability could mean the difference between success and life in prison. Isabella backed against the alley wall, her mind cycling through escape scenarios that all ended the same way. 3 trained professionals, 1 civilian in heels, and an evening gown. The mathematics of violence were as unforgiving as any business equation. "Please don't make this difficult," Victor said, and for the first time, she heard something that might have been genuine regret in his voice. "We have no intention of harming you, but that could change if you force our hand." The larger man moved closer, and Isabella could smell his cologne, something expensive and cloying that would forever remind her of this moment. His hand reached out almost gently, and she knew that once he touched her, it would be over. The van, the conversation, whatever came after, none of it would be her choice. She opened her mouth to scream, though she wasn't sure anyone would hear or care. In Manhattan, people minded their own business, especially when that business looked dangerous. The sound that came out wasn't her scream. It was something else entirely, a roar of pure fury that seemed to shake the brick walls themselves. A figure burst from behind a dumpster near the street entrance, moving with the fluid violence of a predator finally unleashed. The smaller man spun toward the sound, his hand diving inside his jacket, but he was far too slow. The newcomer hit him like a freight train, driving him into the wall with a sickening crack that echoed through the alley. The smaller man, stronger, more agile, was standing 1 foot away, his hands outstretched, his eyes Before the others could react, he was already moving again, a blur of controlled brutality that spoke of training far beyond anything Isabella had ever witnessed. Victor reached for something under his jacket, but the stranger's hand caught his wrist with surgical precision. There was a sound like breaking kindling, and Victor's scream cut through the night air like a blade. The large man, despite his size, moved with surprising speed. His fist flew towards their attacker's head in a punch that would have shattered concrete, but the punch never landed. The stranger slipped the blow like water grabbed the massive arm and used the man's own momentum to send him crashing face first into the alley wall. The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds. When it was over, 3 professional kidnappers lay groaning on the asphalt, and Isabella found herself staring at her unlikely savior. He was tall, but not towering, with the kind of lean, functional build that came from real work rather than gym memberships. His face was weathered but not old, early 30s perhaps, with intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His clothes were working-class practical jeans, boots, and a jacket that had seen better days but was clean and well-maintained. What struck her most was his stillness. After the explosive violence of the rescue, he stood absolutely motionless, watching the 3 men with the patient attention of someone who knew exactly how much damage he'd done and how long it would take them to recover. "Are you hurt?" His voice was quiet with a slight southern drawl that seemed completely at odds with the efficiency of his fighting. Isabella tried to speak but found her throat had closed up entirely. She shook her head, not trusting herself to make coherent sounds. The stranger nodded and pulled out a cell phone. Not a smartphone, she noticed, but one of those basic models that people bought for emergencies. "This is Rowan Straven," he said when someone answered. "I need police and an ambulance at the artist entrance to Lincoln Center. 3 men down, 1 woman safe. No, I'm not going anywhere." He hung up and looked at Isabella with those steady eyes. "Police will be here in about 5 minutes. Ambulance maybe 7. These guys will be conscious before then, but they won't be moving much." "How do you—" Isabella's voice cracked, and she had to start again. "How do you know that—" Rowan's smile was tired but kind. "Experience. The small one has a concussion, the big one probably has a broken nose and some cracked ribs, and their leader there has a fractured wrist. None of it's life-threatening, but they'll be in enough pain to stay put." He walked over to Victor, who was cradled his wrist against his chest, and mumbling in what sounded like Russian. Rowan knelt down and spoke in a voice too quiet for Isabella to hear. Whatever he said made Victor's face go pale, and he nodded rapidly. "What did you tell him?" Isabella asked when Rowan returned to her side. "That if I ever see him again anywhere, I'll finish what I started tonight." Rowan's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. Men like that understand simple messages. The wail of approaching sirens filled the alley, and Isabella felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. She was safe. More than safe, she was alive, and that was more than she'd dared hope for 5 minutes ago. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, looking up at the man who had quite literally saved her life. Rowan shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same thing. "No," Isabella said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have called the police and hoped for the best. You put yourself in danger for a complete stranger." "I've got a daughter," Rowan replied, as if that explained everything. "Someone tries to hurt a woman in front of me, I'm going to do something about it." The first police car pulled up at the mouth of the alley, its red and blue lights painting everything in alternating shadows. 2 officers approached cautiously, hands resting on their weapons until they saw the situation was under control. What followed was a blur of question statements and bureaucratic procedures that Isabella navigated with the same precision she brought to board meetings. She gave her account of events, provided contact information for her lawyers and security team, and watched as the 3 men were loaded into ambulances under police guard. Through it all, Rowan stood quietly to one side, answering questions with the same calm efficiency he'd shown during the fight. He didn't embellish or dramatize, just stated facts in his soft drawl and waited patiently for the next question. "Mr. Straven," one of the detectives said, consulting his notebook, "you said you're a mechanic at Murphy's Garage in Queens." "That's right." "And you were in the area because—" "My daughter had a school concert at Juilliard. I was walking back to my truck when I heard the commotion." Isabella felt something twist in her chest at the casual way he mentioned his daughter. This man had been at a school concert, probably one of the most important moments in a child's life, and he'd risked everything to save a stranger. The detective nodded and closed his notebook. "We'll need you both to come in tomorrow to sign your statements, but you're free to go for tonight." As the police cars pulled away and the alley returned to its usual shadows, Isabella found herself alone with Rowan once again. The contrast between them seemed even more stark. In the aftermath, her designer gown and diamond jewelry, his work clothes, and calloused hands. Two people from completely different worlds brought together by violence and chance. "Your truck," she said suddenly. "Where did you park?" Rowan pointed toward the street. "About 2 blocks that way. I should probably get going. It's getting late and Kellis will be worried." "Kellis." "My daughter. She's 12. His smile transformed his entire face, erasing years and worry lines. Tonight was her first performance with the youth orchestra. She played violin Vivaldi's Spring. She was incredible. The image hit Isabella like a physical blow. This man, this hero who had saved her life, was a single father trying to give his daughter opportunities he'd probably never had. While she lived in a penthouse and commanded boardrooms, he was working as a mechanic and driving to Manhattan for school concerts. "Mr. Straven Rowan, I meant what I said about not knowing how to thank you." He was already shaking his head. "Like I said, anyone would have—" "Stop!" Isabella's voice carried the authority she'd learned in 1,000 negotiations. "Don't diminish what you did tonight. You saved my life. That means something whether you want to acknowledge it or not." Rowan studied her face in the dim light, and she had the strange feeling he was seeing things she usually kept hidden from the world. "You're welcome," he said finally. "I'm glad you're safe." He turned to go, and Isabella felt a moment of panic that had nothing to do with kidnappers or corporate espionage. This man was about to walk out of her life as suddenly as he'd entered it, and somehow that felt like another kind of loss entirely. "Wait," she called out, reaching into her purse for a business card. "Please, take this." Rowan looked at the elegant cardstock with its embossed lettering and raised an eyebrow. "I don't think I'm in the market for artificial intelligence consulting." Despite everything, Isabella laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had in months. "That's not why I'm giving it to you. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call that number. Day or night. It goes directly to me. Ms. Reneth, I don't need Isabella, and yes, you do need it." She pressed the card into his reluctant hand. "You have a daughter to think about. Tonight proved that the world can be a dangerous place when you least expect it. I have resources that most people can't imagine. If anything ever happens, if you ever need help, you call me." Rowan pocketed the card with obvious reluctance. "This feels like too much." "It's not nearly enough." Isabella met his eyes, trying to convey the depth of her gratitude. "You gave me back my life tonight. The least I can do is make sure you know you're not alone in the world." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that transcended their different circumstances and backgrounds. Isabella had spent years building walls around herself, using wealth and power to keep the world at a safe distance. But standing in that alley with this quiet, brave man, those walls felt suddenly fragile. "I should go," Rowan said softly. "Kellis will be waiting up." "Of course. Tell her—" Isabella paused, not sure what message a billionaire CEO could possibly send to a 12-year-old girl. "Tell her I said she's lucky to have a father like you." Rowan's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "I'll do that." He walked away into the Manhattan darkness, leaving Isabella alone with the echo of sirens and the scent of expensive cologne that no longer seemed threatening. She stood there for a long time, holding his business card like a lifeline, knowing that something fundamental had shifted in her carefully ordered world. Her phone buzzed Marcus, probably wondering where she'd disappeared to. There would be questions, security briefings, emergency board meetings. The machinery of her empire would grind back to life, demanding her attention and energy. But for the first time in years, Isabella Reneth found herself thinking about something other than quarterly profits and market share. She was thinking about a man who worked with his hands and raised his daughter alone, who went to school concerts and risked his life for strangers without expecting anything in return. She was thinking about what it might feel like to have someone like that in her life, not as an employee or a business partner, but as something more, something real. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the first genuine emotion she'd experienced in longer than she cared to admit. Isabella pulled out her phone and speed-dialed her head of security. "James, it's Isabella. We need to talk. Tonight. And I want everything you can find on a man named Rowan Straven, mechanic, single father, lives somewhere in Queens. No, nothing intrusive. Just make sure he's protected. He's important to me now." She hung up without waiting for questions and walked toward the street where her driver waited. Behind her, the alley returned to its secrets and shadows, but the memory of what had happened there would change everything that came after. The night Isabella Reyna's life was saved was also the night she began to understand what she'd been missing in her relentless pursuit of success. And somewhere in Queens, a mechanic named Rowan was tucking his daughter into bed, unaware that he'd just become the most important person in a billionaire's carefully controlled world. The game had changed. Neither of them knew it yet, but everything that happened from this moment forward would be about what they meant to each other and what people would do to tear them apart. 3 weeks had passed since that night in the alley, but Isabella found herself thinking about Rowan Straven at the most inconvenient moments. During board meetings, she'd catch herself wondering what he was doing in his garage in Queens. While reviewing quarterly projections, she'd remember the way his eyes had gone hard and dangerous when those men threatened her, then soft again when he mentioned his daughter. She'd had James run a discreet background check. Nothing invasive, she'd told herself, just enough to ensure his safety. What she'd learned had only deepened her fascination. Rowan Michael Straven, 32, honorably discharged Navy SEAL after 8 years of service that included 3 tours in Afghanistan. His wife Sarah had died of cancer when Kellis was 7, leaving him to raise their daughter alone. He'd turned down multiple lucrative security positions to stay in New York working at Murphy's Garage for a fraction of what his skills could command elsewhere. The man was a walking contradiction, deadly enough to take down 3 trained kidnappers without breaking a sweat, gentle enough to spend his evenings helping a 12-year-old with violin practice. Isabella had dealt with thousands of people in her career, from senators to CEOs to heads of state, but none of them had lingered in her thoughts the way this quiet mechanic did. It was Friday evening, and she stood in her penthouse office looking out at the city lights when Marcus knocked on her door. "Miss Reneth, there's a situation." Isabella turned from the window, noting the tension in her assistant's normally unflappable demeanor. "What kind of situation?" "James is on line 1. He says it's urgent and concerns Mr. Straven." Isabella's blood turned to ice. She lunged for the phone, nearly knocking over her coffee in the process. "James, what's happened?" "There was an incident at the garage about 2 hours ago," her head of security said without preamble. 3 men professionally dressed asking questions about Rowan. The owner, Murphy, got suspicious and told them he wasn't there. They left, but Murphy called Rowan to warn him. When Rowan got home, his apartment had been searched. Professional job, nothing obviously missing, but everything had been touched. Someone was looking for something. Isabella sank into her chair, her mind racing. Where is he now? Unknown. Murphy says Rowan picked up his daughter from school and disappeared. His truck hasn't been seen since this afternoon. The weight of responsibility crashed over Isabella like a physical blow. These men, whoever they were, had found Rowan because of her. Because he'd saved her life, he and his daughter were now in danger. "I want every resource we have on this," she said, her voice carrying the steel that had built her empire. "Find them. Now." "Already on it. I've got teams canvassing Queens, checking hotels, monitoring traffic cameras. But Isabella..." James paused, which was unlike him. "There's something else." The description Murphy gave of one of the men, tall, pale, European accent. "It matches Viktor Kozlov." Isabella's hand tightened on the phone. "That's impossible. He's in custody." "He was released on bail yesterday. Some high-powered lawyer from a firm I've never heard of posted $2 million cash. The assault charges mysteriously got reduced to disorderly conduct." "Find him," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more frightening than any shout. Find him and find Rowan. I don't care what it costs. Already in motion. But Isabella, if these people are targeting him because of you, then it's my responsibility to protect him. Isabella was already moving toward her private elevator. I'll be in the car in 5 minutes. Send me everything you have. The drive through Queens in her armored Mercedes felt like a journey through a different world. Isabella had grown up in Manhattan's Upper East Side, attended boarding schools in Switzerland, and spent her adult life in penthouses and corporate jets. The narrow streets lined with row houses and corner bodegas might as well have been another planet. Murphy's garage sat on a corner lot that had probably seen better decades. The neon sign flickered sporadically, casting intermittent red light across the oil-stained concrete. Despite the late hour, the old man was still there, hosing down the service bay with aggressive precision that spoke of nervous energy. Isabella stepped out of the Mercedes, acutely aware that her Valentino suit and Louboutin heels marked her as an outsider. Murphy looked up from his work, taking in the expensive car and the woman who clearly didn't belong in his world. "You must be the lady," he said, setting down the hose. "Rowan said you might come around." "He talked about me." Murphy's weathered face creased into something that might have been a smile. "Boy doesn't talk much about anything, but he mentioned there was a woman he helped out. Said she was important, and if anything ever happened to him, she'd make sure Kellis was taken care of." The casual way he mentioned Rowan's concern for his daughter's future hit Isabella harder than she'd expected. "Mr. Murphy, I need to know everything that happened today. Everything you remember about those men." Murphy wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. "They came in around 3, maybe 3:30. Expensive suits, foreign accents, not all the same kind, mind you. One sounded Russian, another maybe German. The third one didn't say much, but when he did, it was American. Military, if I had to guess. What did they want? Asked a lot of questions about Rowan. How long he'd worked here, what kind of hours he kept, whether he had family. I told them he wasn't here and they should take their questions somewhere else." Murphy's eyes hardened. "Been running this place for 40 years. I know trouble when I smell it, and these boys reeked of it." Isabella pulled out her phone and showed him a photo James had sent Victor Kozlov's booking photo from 3 weeks ago. "Was this one of them?" Murphy squinted at the screen and nodded grimly. "That's the Russian. Spoke real polite, but his eyes were dead as a shark's. Soon as they left, I called Rowan and told him to stay away from here until we knew what was what." "And you haven't heard from him since?" "Not directly. But—" Murphy hesitated, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Rowan's a careful man. Spent enough time in bad places to know how to disappear when he needs to. Before his wife died, he set up what he called contingencies. Safe places, clean phones, cash stashes. Man like that doesn't just vanish, he goes to ground." Isabella felt a flicker of hope. "Do you know where he might go?" Murphy shook his head. "He never told me specifics, and I never asked. But I know he's got friends from the service scattered around. Men who owe him favors and don't ask questions." Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from James. "Got them. Motel 6 in Astoria. Room 127. Come alone." She looked up to find Murphy studying her with shrewd eyes. "You care about him," he said. It wasn't a question. Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He saved my life. I owe him." Murphy's smile was knowing. "Lady, I've seen a lot of people in my time. Folks who owe debts, they write checks or send flowers. They don't drive to Queens at 10 o'clock at night, looking like they're ready to tear the world apart." Before Isabella could respond, her phone rang. Unknown number, but something made her answer. "Isabella." Rowan's voice was quiet, cautious. "Murphy said you came by the garage. Rowan, thank God. Are you safe? Is Kellis okay?" "We're fine. For now." She could hear traffic in the background, the distant sound of a television. "But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Those men who came to the garage, they're connected to what happened 3 weeks ago, aren't they?" Isabella closed her eyes, hating the truth she had to tell. "Yes, I think so." "Then this is about you, about whatever those people wanted that night." "Rowan, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to get dragged into this. I had no idea." "Stop." His voice was firm but not angry. "You didn't drag me into anything. I made a choice that night, and I'd make it again. But my daughter, his voice cracked slightly. I won't let anything happen to her because of a choice I made. Where are you? I can help. I have resources. I know you do. But these people, whoever they are, they're not going to stop. They want something from you, and they think I'm a way to get it. Isabella could hear Kellis in the background, her young voice asking about dinner. The normalcy of it. A father and daughter discussing mundane things while hiding from dangerous men made Isabella's chest tighten with guilt and something else she didn't want to name. There's a way to end this, she said quietly. If I give them what they want. No. Rowan's voice was sharp. Whatever they're after, it's not worth your life. These people don't negotiate, Isabella. They take what they want and eliminate loose ends. Then what do you suggest? Because I won't let you and Kellis live in hiding because of me. There was a long pause. In the background, Isabella could hear Kellis practicing violin, the same Vivaldi piece she'd played at her concert the night everything changed. I have an idea, Rowan said finally, but you're not going to like it. Tell me. You said that night that you had resources. Security people, surveillance equipment, safe houses. What if we use them as bait? Isabella's blood ran cold. Absolutely not. I won't put you in more danger. You won't be putting me anywhere. I'll be putting myself there. These people want me to get to you, so we let them think they can. Rowan, no. These aren't street criminals or corporate spies. They're professionals. Military trained, probably. So am I. His voice carried a quiet confidence that was somehow more frightening than any boast. Isabella, I spent 8 years hunting people like this in places you can't imagine. I know how they think, how they operate, and I know their weaknesses. What about Kellis? She'll be safe. I have a friend upstate, another vet, who owes me a favor. His place is off the grid, invisible to anyone who doesn't already know where to look. Kellis will stay there until this is over. Isabella wanted to argue to find another solution that didn't involve putting this good man in harm's way. But she could hear the determination in his voice, the same quiet resolve that had driven him into that alley 3 weeks ago. What do you need from me? She asked. A safe house, somewhere secure but not obvious. And surveillance equipment. I want to know exactly who we're dealing with before I make my move. Isabella was already thinking, her mind cycling through properties and possibilities. I have a place in the Hamptons, isolated but with good security systems. And James has access to military-grade surveillance equipment. Good. But Isabella, if we do this, you have to promise me something. What? When it gets dangerous, and it will get dangerous, you'll do exactly what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it. No arguments, no discussion. Can you promise me that? Isabella had built her empire by never ceding control to anyone, by always maintaining the upper hand in any situation. The idea of putting her life in someone else's hands went against every instinct she'd developed over 15 years in business. But she remembered the way he'd moved in that alley, the precision and control that had saved her life. If anyone could keep her safe, it was Rowan Straven. I promise, she said. Good. I'll call you in 2 hours with details. And Isabella, yes. Thank you for caring enough to come looking for me. It means more than you know. The line went dead, leaving Isabella standing in a garage in Queens with an old man who was still watching her with knowing eyes. You're in love with him, Murphy said matter-of-factly. Isabella opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. The truth was too complicated for simple denials. He's a good man, Murphy continued, returning to his cleaning. Lost too much already. Don't let him lose any more. Isabella drove back to Manhattan in thoughtful silence, her mind already working on logistics and contingencies. By the time she reached her penthouse, she had 3 security teams on standby, a helicopter fueled and ready, and access to enough surveillance equipment to monitor a small country. But beneath the familiar comfort of planning and preparation, something else was stirring. Fear, yes, but also anticipation. For the first time in years, she was about to do something that mattered more than profit margins or market share. She was about to fight for someone she cared about. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like waking up after a very long sleep. Her phone buzzed with another message from James Kozlov, and his team just checked out of the motel. No forwarding address. They're moving. Isabella looked out at the city lights somewhere out there. A man who had saved her life was preparing to risk everything again, this time not just for her, but for the chance that they might both survive long enough to see where this impossible connection between them could lead. The game was about to begin in earnest, and Isabella Renneth had never wanted to win anything more in her life. 2 hours later, her private phone rang. "I'm ready." Rowan's voice was steady, professional. "Are you?" Isabella thought about her comfortable life, her predictable routine, the walls she'd built to keep the world at a safe distance. Then she thought about a 12-year-old girl practicing violin and the man who would do anything to protect her. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." "Then let's end this." The Hampton safe house sat on 40 acres of carefully manicured isolation, its Georgian facade hiding layers of security that had cost Isabella more than most people's lifetime earnings. As dawn broke over the Atlantic, she stood at the kitchen window watching Rowan methodically check sightlines and escape routes, his movements precise and economical, despite the obvious exhaustion weighing on his shoulders. He'd driven through the night after dropping Kellis at his friend's cabin upstate, and Isabella had seen the pain in his eyes when he talked about leaving his daughter. The goodbye had been brief, too brief for a father who might not survive the next 48 hours, but long enough for a 12-year-old girl to understand that something was terribly wrong. "She asked me if you were my girlfriend," Rowan had said during the drive out to Long Island, his voice carefully neutral in the darkness of her Mercedes. "I didn't know what to tell her." Isabella had felt her breath catch. "What did you say?" "That you were someone important to me. Someone worth protecting." He'd glanced at her, then his eyes unreadable in the dashboard light. "I hope that was okay." Now, watching him transform her peaceful retreat into a tactical fortress, Isabella wondered what exactly they were to each other. Business associates seemed too cold, friends too simple. There was something deeper happening between them. Something that had started in that alley and was growing stronger, with each shared glance, each moment of understanding that passed between them without words. James arrived at 7 with a van full of surveillance equipment and 3 of his most trusted operatives. Isabella had worked with her head of security for 8 years, but she'd never seen him look so grim. "We've got movement," he announced without preamble, setting up a laptop on the kitchen island. "Kozlov and his team checked into a motel in Southampton 2 hours ago. 4 men total, and they're not trying to hide their presence." Rowan appeared at Isabella's shoulder close enough that she could smell the soap he'd used that morning, something simple and clean that was nothing like the expensive colognes worn by the men in her usual orbit. "They want us to know they're here," he said, studying the surveillance photos. "This is psychological warfare. They're trying to make us nervous, force us into making mistakes." "Is it working?" Isabella asked, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. Rowan's smile was quick and dangerous. Not even a little bit. The next few hours passed in careful preparation that felt surreally normal. James's team installed cameras and motion sensors, while Isabella and Rowan planned contingencies over coffee that tasted too bitter and Danish pastries neither of them could stomach. They discussed escape routes and communication protocols with the same matter-of-fact efficiency most couples use to plan dinner parties. "The blind spot is here." Rowan pointed to a section of the property map where the security coverage thinned near the beach access. "If they're smart, and they are, that's where they'll come from." "So we reinforce it," Isabella suggested, but Rowan was already shaking his head. "No, we leave it exactly as it is. Let them think they found our weakness." Isabella studied his profile, noting the way his jaw tightened when he concentrated. "You want them to come through there. I want them to think they're in control right up until the moment they're not." Rowan's fingers traced possible approach routes on the map. "These men are professionals, but they're not SEALs. They rely on overwhelming force and intimidation. Take away their advantages. Force them to fight on unfamiliar ground, and they become just 3 more targets." The casual way he said targets sent a chill through Isabella that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the sudden understanding of what kind of man she'd brought into her life. Rowan Straven wasn't just a mechanic who'd happened to be in the right place at the right time. He was a weapon, a precisely calibrated instrument of violence who'd chosen to use his skills to protect instead of destroy. "Rowan," she said softly, "after this is over, what happens to us?" He looked up from the map, his eyes searching her face. "I don't know. I've been wondering the same thing." Before Isabella could respond, James's voice crackled through the comm system. "We've got company, black SUV diplomatic plates coming up the main drive." Rowan was on his feet, instantly checking the pistol James had provided him. "How many?" "Just one. The driver's alone, and he's not trying to hide his approach." Isabella and Rowan exchanged glances. This wasn't the assault they'd been expecting. "I'll handle this," Isabella said, moving toward the front door. Rowan's hand caught her arm, gentle but firm. "We handle it. Together." The SUV stopped in the circular drive with diplomatic precision, and the man who emerged looked nothing like the thugs who'd tried to kidnap Isabella 3 weeks ago. He was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a way that spoke of old money and older power. His smile was warm and genuine as he approached the front door, briefcase in hand, looking for all the world like a lawyer coming to discuss estate planning. "Ms. Reneth," he said when Isabella opened the door. "My name is Charles Whitmore. I represent certain interests that would very much like to avoid any unpleasantness this weekend." "And what interests would those be, Mr. Whitmore?" Isabella kept her voice level, acutely aware of Rowan standing just behind her, ready to move at the first sign of trouble. "May I come in? This is a conversation best held in private." Isabella glanced back at Rowan, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. They stepped aside and Whitmore entered with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been refused anything in his life. The living room felt different with his presence in it, smaller somehow, despite his perfectly diplomatic demeanor. He settled into one of Isabella's antique chairs, as if he owned it, setting his briefcase on the coffee table with practiced precision. "Ms. Reneth, Mr. Straven," Whitmore began, including Rowan with a nod that suggested he knew exactly who he was dealing with. "I'm here to offer you a solution to what I understand has become a rather complicated situation." "Let me guess," Rowan said, his voice flat. "We give you what you want, and everyone walks away happy." Whitmore's smile never wavered. "In essence, yes, though the details are somewhat more nuanced." He opened the briefcase and withdrew a tablet which he placed on the coffee table facing Isabella. The screen showed financial documents, technical specifications, and what looked like classified military contracts. 3 months ago, your acquisition of Meridian Defense Systems gave Reneth Dynamics access to some rather sensitive technologies," Whitmore continued. "Specifically, the Phoenix Protocol, an autonomous defense system capable of identifying and neutralizing threats without human oversight." Isabella's blood ran cold. Phoenix was buried so deep in Meridian's classified files that only 3 people in her entire organization knew it existed. "How do you know about Phoenix?" "Ms. Reneth, my employers have interests that span continents and decades. Very little happens in the defense sector without our knowledge." Whitmore swiped to the next screen, showing satellite images of military installations. "The problem is that Phoenix represents a significant disruption to certain established arrangements." Rowan moved closer to Isabella, his presence both protective and reassuring. "What kind of arrangements?" "The kind that keep the world's balance of power exactly where it needs to be, Mr. Straven. Phoenix in the wrong hands could upset relationships that have been carefully cultivated for generations." Whitmore's eyes never left Isabella's face. "My employers simply want to ensure that such technology remains in appropriate hands." "And if I refuse?" Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer. Whitmore's expression became genuinely regretful. "Ms. Reneth, you're an intelligent woman. Surely you understand that some things are larger than individual choice." The threat hung in the air like smoke, polite but unmistakable. Isabella felt Rowan tense beside her, and she knew he was calculating distances, angles, the time it would take to reach Whitmore if diplomacy failed. "However," Whitmore continued, "my employers are not unreasonable. They're prepared to offer you substantial compensation for your cooperation. $50 billion transferred to accounts of your choosing. In exchange, you transfer the Phoenix technology to a more appropriate custodian." The number hit Isabella like a physical blow. 50 billion was more than most countries' GDP, enough to make her one of the wealthiest individuals in human history. It was also exactly the kind of offer that made refusal seem not just stupid, but impossible. "And if I take your generous offer," Isabella said carefully, "what happens to Mr. Straven, to his daughter?" "They disappear," Whitmore said simply. "New identities, new lives, complete protection from any future complications. Your mechanic becomes a very wealthy man with a very secure future." Isabella looked at Rowan, trying to read his expression. The offer would solve everything, her problems. His problems, Kellis's future. All she had to do was sign over technology she'd barely begun to understand, to people whose motives she couldn't fathom. "I need time to consider," she said finally. Whitmore consulted an expensive watch. "I'm afraid time is something we have very little of. My associates are becoming impatient. Mr. Kozlov in particular has expressed some rather strong opinions about how this matter should be resolved." "How long?" Rowan asked. 24 hours. After that, I'm afraid the offer will be withdrawn and less diplomatic solutions will be explored." Whitmore stood closing his briefcase with the same precision he'd opened it. "Ms. Reneth, I hope you'll make the sensible choice. You have everything to gain and, frankly, everything to lose." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Straven, my associates asked me to pass along their compliments on your performance 3 weeks ago. Victor was quite impressed, despite his injuries. He's looking forward to a rematch." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid falling shut. Isabella and Rowan stood in the sudden silence, the weight of the ultimatum settling over them like fog. $50 billion, Isabella said finally. "Blood money," Rowan replied without hesitation. "You don't know that. Maybe they really are trying to prevent Phoenix from falling into the wrong hands." Rowan turned to face her, his eyes intense. "Isabella, look at me. Really look at me. Do I seem like the kind of person who would take money from people who kidnap women and threaten children?" The question hit her harder than she'd expected. In her world, everyone had a price. Senators, judges, competitors. The idea that someone might be genuinely incorruptible was so foreign it felt almost naive. But looking into Rowan's eyes, she realized that was exactly what made him different from every other man she'd ever known. He wasn't calculating odds or weighing benefits. He was simply fundamentally good. "What's Phoenix?" he asked. "Really?" Isabella walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured lawn that might become a battlefield before the day was over. "It's exactly what Whitmore said, an autonomous defense system. But it's more than that. Phoenix can learn, adapt, evolve its tactics based on threats it encounters. In the right hands, it could end wars before they start. In the wrong hands, it could start wars that never end," Rowan finished. "The technology is worth more than money can measure. It could reshape global politics, eliminate the need for human soldiers, change the fundamental nature of conflict." Isabella turned back to him. "And I'm the only person who can access it." James's voice crackled through the comm system again. "Movement at the perimeter. Looks like our friends are getting restless." Rowan immediately shifted into tactical mode, checking his weapon and scanning the security monitors James had set up around the room. "How many Tishful?" 4 vehicles, maybe 12 to 15 personnel. They're not making any aggressive moves yet, but they're definitely positioning for something." Isabella felt her pulse spike. "I thought Whitmore said we had 24 hours. "Whitmore says a lot of things," Rowan replied grimly. "But Kozlov isn't the patient type. My guess is he's planning to force your hand before you have time to think too clearly about the choice." The next few hours passed in tense preparation. James coordinated with his team to establish overlapping fields of fire, while Rowan disappeared into the house's security room to study the feeds from hidden cameras positioned throughout the property. Isabella found herself pacing the living room like a caged animal, her mind cycling through possibilities and consequences. At 3 in the afternoon, her secure phone rang. "Isabella." Kellis's voice was small and frightened. "There are men here, bad men. They want to talk to you." Isabella's world tilted on its axis. "Kellis, honey, where's Uncle Jack?" "They hurt him. He's bleeding, but he's alive." The man with the accent says, if you don't give them what they want, they're going to... The phone went dead. Rowan appeared in the doorway, his face white with fury. They have her. Isabella was already moving toward the door, but Rowan caught her arm. Where are you going? To give them what they want. This ends now. No. Rowan's voice was hard as granite. You give them Phoenix and we're all dead anyway. These people don't leave witnesses. Then what do you suggest? Because that's your daughter they're threatening. Rowan's jaw worked silently for a moment, and Isabella saw the war raging behind his eyes, the father fighting the soldier, love battling training. We go get her, he said finally. Against 15 armed professionals. That's suicide. Maybe. But it's also the only chance we have. Rowan was already strapping on tactical gear James had provided. Isabella, these people have spent 3 weeks underestimating me. Underestimating us. That's their weakness. Isabella watched him transform before her eyes from the quiet mechanic she'd come to care about into something harder, more dangerous. This was the man who'd survived 8 years of war, who'd brought his brothers home against impossible odds. What do you need from me? She asked. I need you to stay here and coordinate with James. Monitor communications, watch the perimeter feeds, be my eyes and ears. Absolutely not. If you're going after Kellis, I'm going with you. Isabella. No arguments. Remember, you said when it got dangerous I had to do what you told me. Well, this is me telling you I'm not staying behind while you risk your life for my mistakes. Rowan studied her face and something in his expression shifted. You understand this isn't a board meeting or a hostile takeover. People are going to die tonight. I understand, Isabella said, surprised by her own certainty. But your daughter is in danger because of me. I won't hide behind walls while you clean up my mess. Something passed between them, then a moment of complete understanding that transcended their different backgrounds and circumstances. They weren't just Isabella the CEO and Rowan the mechanic anymore. They were partners bound together by circumstances and choice, ready to face whatever came next as a team. James, Rowan called over the comm. Change of plans. Ms. Reneth and I are going mobile. I need you to coordinate support and maintain overwatch. Sir, with respect, that's tactically unsound. You should... James. Isabella cut in her voice, carrying the authority that had built her empire. Do as he says. The drive north toward the cabin where Kellis was being held felt like traveling through a dream. Isabella sat in the passenger seat of James's tactical vehicle, watching Rowan check and recheck his equipment with mechanical precision. He'd given her a pistol and shown her how to use it, though they both knew her value wouldn't be in firepower. Tell me about the Phoenix Protocol, Rowan said, as they navigated the winding mountain roads. Everything. If we're going to end this, I need to understand what we're really fighting for. Isabella found herself describing technology she'd barely begun to comprehend herself. Artificial intelligence that could wage war without human oversight, learning algorithms that grew stronger with each engagement, defensive systems that could protect or destroy with equal efficiency. It's not just a weapon, she realized as she spoke. It's evolution. The next step in how conflicts will be resolved. Whoever controls Phoenix doesn't just have military superiority. They have the power to reshape civilization itself. And you built this. Rowan's voice held a note of something that might have been awe. I acquired it. The team at Meridian had been developing it for years before I bought the company. I just saw its potential. They drove in thoughtful silence for several miles before Rowan spoke again. Isabella, when this is over, assuming we both survive what happens between us. The question she'd been avoiding crashed over her like a wave. In her world, relationships were contracts. Partnerships were transactions. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford. But sitting in a tactical vehicle racing toward a confrontation that might cost them everything, those rules seemed suddenly meaningless. I don't know, she said honestly. My life, my world, it's not designed for normal relationships. The board, the shareholders, the media, they'd tear us apart. I'm not asking about them. I'm asking about us. Isabella looked at his profile in the dashboard light, memorizing the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands remained steady on the wheel, despite everything they were facing. I care about you. she said softly. More than I thought I was capable of caring about anyone. But I don't know how to make that work with everything else. We'll figure it out, Rowan said with quiet confidence. If we're alive tomorrow, we'll have time to figure it out. James's voice crackled through the radio. Target acquired. Cabin's about 2 miles ahead off a dirt road that splits to the right. I count 4 vehicles. Thermal imaging shows approximately 8 to 10 personnel. Kellis appears to be in the main structure along with 2 guards. Rowan pulled the vehicle off the main road, parking in a stand of trees that provided concealment. This is where we go dark, he said, switching off the radio. From here on, it's just us. They approached the cabin through dense forest that muffled their footsteps and provided natural camouflage. Rowan moved like a ghost, barely disturbing the fallen leaves, while Isabella struggled to keep up without making noise. Every few hundred yards, he would stop, listen, then continue forward with the patience of someone who understood that rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes led to death. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by the kind of wilderness that could hide bodies for decades. Warm light spilled from the windows, and smoke rose from the chimney, a picture of rustic tranquility that would have been perfect if not for the armed guards walking patrol routes around the perimeter. Rowan pulled Isabella behind a fallen tree, his lips close to her ear. I count 6 outside, probably 3 or 4 more inside with Kellis. I'm going to circle around and take out the perimeter guards. When you hear my signal, 3 quick gunshots, you create a distraction at the front door. What kind of distraction? Walk up and knock. Tell them you're there to negotiate. They won't shoot you immediately, you're too valuable. But it'll draw their attention away from the back of the house. Isabella's mouth went dry. And if they don't buy it? Rowan's smile was grim but reassuring. Then we improvise. But Isabella, if things go wrong, if you hear sustained gunfire, or if I don't signal within 20 minutes, you get out of here. You run back to the car and you drive away. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. Because if we're both dead, there's no one left to stop these people from taking Phoenix and doing whatever they want with it. Before Isabella could argue, Rowan melted back into the forest like he'd never been there at all. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. Isabella crouched behind the fallen tree, listening to her own heartbeat and the distant sounds of guards talking in languages she didn't recognize. Somewhere in that cabin, a 12-year-old girl was waiting for her father to save her, probably terrified, but trying to be brave because that's what Straven women did. The thought surprised her, thinking of Kellis as someone connected to her future, someone she wanted to protect not just out of guilt, but out of genuine affection. When had she started planning a life that included a ready-made family? 3 gunshots echoed through the forest, sharp and precise. Isabella took a deep breath, checked the pistol Rowan had given her, and walked out of the trees toward the cabin's front door. 2 guards at the entrance spun toward her, weapons raised, shouting in Russian. Isabella raised her hands, the picture of cooperative surrender. I'm Isabella Reneth, she called out. I'm here to negotiate. I have what your employers want. The cabin door opened and Viktor Kozlov emerged, his right wrist still in a cast from their encounter 3 weeks ago. His smile was cold and satisfied. Ms. Reneth, he said pleasantly, how good of you to join us, though I confess I'm surprised to see you without your protective friend. He's dead, Isabella lied smoothly. Your people killed him 2 hours ago. Now I want to make a deal. Victor's eyes narrowed. I think you're lying. Mr. Straven is not so easy to kill. Gunfire erupted from the back of the cabin, not the controlled shots of Rowan's signal, but the rapid, panicked bursts of men under attack. Victor spun toward the sound, shouting orders in rapid Russian. Isabella didn't hesitate. She pulled the pistol from her jacket and put 2 bullets center mass into the nearest guard before he could turn back toward her. The second guard was faster, but not fast enough. Rowan appeared behind him like an avenging angel, sliding a knife between his ribs with surgical precision. Victor dove for cover behind a woodpile, his own weapon clearing its holster with professional speed. But Isabella was already moving, following the path Rowan had shown her, to circle around the cabin's blind spot. Inside, she could hear Kellis screaming not in fear, but in fury, the sound of a girl who had definitely inherited her father's fighting spirit. The back door exploded outward as Rowan kicked it off its hinges, moving through the cabin like a force of nature. Isabella followed, her heart pounding with adrenaline and terror and something that might have been excitement. They found Kellis in the cabin's main room, her hands zip-tied to a chair, but very much alive and angry. 2 guards lay motionless nearby, and a third was crawling toward a rifle he'd dropped when Rowan's assault began. Isabella put a bullet in the crawling man's leg, stopping him cold. "Stay down," she commanded, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "Dad!" Kellis's cry was pure relief and joy. Rowan cut her restraints with swift efficiency, gathering his daughter into his arms. "Are you hurt? Did they hurt you?" "I'm okay. Uncle Jack, they shot him, but he said it wasn't bad. He told me you'd come." Kellis looked past her father to Isabella, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You came too." "Of course I did," Isabella said, and meant it completely. Victor's voice echoed from outside. "Mr. Straven, Ms. Renith, I think we need to discuss terms." Rowan handed Kellis to Isabella, his eyes hard as winter. "Get her to the back bedroom and stay there. This isn't over." "Rowan, don't. It ends tonight," he said simply. "One way or another, it ends tonight." He moved toward the front of the cabin, and Isabella understood that she was about to see exactly what kind of man had saved her life in that Manhattan alley. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she found herself falling a little deeper in love with the quiet mechanic who'd become her guardian angel, and might, if they survived the next hour, become something even more precious, her future. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Isabella Reneth had never wanted anything more than to see tomorrow dawn with Rowan Straven beside her. The silence that followed Rowan's words stretched like a held breath. Isabella crouched in the back bedroom with Kellis pressed against her side, listening to the sound of her own heartbeat and the distant crackle of the cabin's fire. Through the thin walls, she could hear Victor's voice calling out negotiation terms that sounded more like threats wrapped in diplomatic language. "Ms. Renith." Victor's accent carried clearly through the mountain air. "I have 12 more men positioned throughout these woods. Mr. Straven may be skilled, but he is not invincible." Kellis looked up at Isabella, her young face pale but determined. "He's lying," she whispered. "Dad taught me to count gunshots. There were only 8 men here when they brought me inside." Isabella felt a surge of admiration for this remarkable girl who could analyze tactical situations while zip-tied to a chair. "How do you know that?" "Dad always said that in dangerous situations, you count everything shots fired. Voices, heard footsteps, car doors. Information keeps you alive." Kellis's eyes were bright with fierce intelligence. "There are maybe 4 men left, including the scary one outside." Through the window, Isabella could see Rowan moving with predatory patience along the cabin's front wall. Even in the dim light, his movements held the fluid grace of someone completely in his element. This wasn't the gentle mechanic who helped his daughter with violin practice. This was the Navy SEAL who'd survived 8 years of war and brought his brothers home alive. "Your father is extraordinary," Isabella murmured as much to herself as to Kellis. "I know," Kellis replied with simple pride. "He doesn't think he is, though. Ever since Mom died, he thinks he's just getting by. But I see how other dads are with their kids, and none of them would have done what he's doing right now." The observation hit Isabella with unexpected force. In her world, extraordinary was measured in quarterly profits and market dominance. But watching Rowan risk everything for his daughter's safety, she was beginning to understand that there were different kinds of power, different kinds of strength that couldn't be quantified in board meetings or annual reports. Victor's voice rose again, tinged now with frustration. "Mr. Straven, you are vastly outnumbered. Why throw your life away for a woman who will discard you the moment this inconvenience is resolved?" Isabella felt Kellis stiffen beside her. "That's not true, is it?" the girl asked quietly. "You wouldn't do that to Dad." The question pierced through Isabella's defenses like a blade. A month ago, she might not have been able to answer with certainty. Her life was compartmentalized, controlled, designed to minimize emotional risk. But sitting in a remote cabin with bullets flying and this brave girl looking at her with hope and trust, those old patterns felt suddenly meaningless. "No, sweetheart," Isabella said, meaning it completely. "I would never do that to your father. Or to you." Kellis studied her face with the same intense scrutiny Isabella had seen in Rowan's eyes. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded once and turned her attention back to the window. "Dad's moving," Kellis whispered. "He's going to circle around behind them." Isabella followed the girl's gaze, but couldn't see anything in the darkness beyond the trees. "How can you tell?" "The way he was positioned against the wall. Dad doesn't waste motion, every step has a purpose." Kellis's voice held the same quiet confidence Isabella had heard in Rowan's. "He's going to make them think he's retreating, then hit them from where they don't expect." A gunshot cracked through the night, followed by a cry of pain and angry shouting in what sounded like German. Victor's voice rose above the chaos, barking orders that were answered by the sound of running footsteps. "One down," Kellis said matter-of-factly. Isabella stared at this 12-year-old girl who was calmly analyzing a firefight like a tactical expert. "Kellis, how do you know so much about combat?" Kellis's expression became wistful. "Dad has nightmares sometimes. Bad ones from when he was deployed. He tries to hide them, but our apartment isn't very big." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I asked him about the war once, and he told me that the best way to protect people you love is to understand how dangerous the world can be. So he taught me things. How to count shots, how to tell good guys from bad guys, how to stay calm when everything goes crazy." The picture Isabella was getting of Rowan's life, single father working multiple jobs, haunted by memories of war, trying to give his daughter a normal childhood while preparing her for an abnormal world, made her chest tighten with something deeper than affection. This man had survived horrors she couldn't imagine, yet he'd emerged from that crucible with his fundamental decency intact. Another gunshot echoed through the woods, followed by the distinctive sound of someone crashing through underbrush. Victor's voice was closer now, tight with anger and what might have been fear. "Straven, you cannot run forever. We know about your financial situation, your daughter's school, your pathetic garage job. Even if you survive tonight, we will find you again." Isabella felt rage flare in her chest. Not the cold, calculating anger she used in business, but something hot and protective and entirely unfamiliar. These people had threatened a child, terrorized an innocent family, and they were doing it because of her. "I'm going out there," she said, checking the pistol Rowan had given her. Kellis caught her arm. "Dad said to stay here. Your father is outnumbered and outgunned. I'm not going to hide while he fights my battles. But if you get hurt, Dad will lose focus. That's what happened to his team leader in Afghanistan. He got distracted trying to save someone, and it got everyone killed." The words stopped Isabella cold. She looked down at Kellis, seeing not just a frightened child, but a young woman who understood the complexities of love and war with heartbreaking clarity. "Then what do you suggest?" Isabella asked. Kellis was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Dad always says the best weapon is the one your enemy doesn't know you have. What do these men want more than anything? The Phoenix Protocol. And where is it?" Isabella touched the encrypted drive in her jacket pocket. "Right here." "Then we use that." Kellis's eyes were bright with sudden inspiration. "But not the way they expect." Before Isabella could ask what she meant, the cabin's front window exploded inward in a shower of glass and gunfire. Someone was spraying bullets through the living room, not aiming at anything specific, but trying to force anyone inside to keep their heads down. Isabella pulled Kellis to the floor, covering the girl's body with her own, as splinters of wood rained down around them. The sustained gunfire lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like hours before silence returned. "Mr. Straven," Victor's voice was triumphant now. "I hope that demonstration was enlightening. We have enough ammunition to level this entire cabin. Surrender now, and your daughter lives." Through the bedroom wall, Isabella could hear footsteps moving through the living room. Heavy boots, military precision, at least 2 men clearing the cabin room by room. They would reach the back bedroom in moments. Isabella looked at Kellis, seeing her own desperation reflected in the girl's eyes. They were trapped, outnumbered, with nowhere to run. That's when she heard it, the faint sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. Kellis heard it too, her face lighting up with hope. "James?" Isabella nodded, pulling out her phone to check for signal. One bar, barely enough for text messages. She typed rapidly, "Under fire at cabin. Need immediate extraction." The response came back instantly, 2 minutes out. "Mark your position." Isabella looked around the bedroom, frantically searching for something that could serve as a signal. Her eyes fell on a small bedside lamp with a bright halogen bulb. "When I count to 3, we're going to the window," she told Kellis. "I'm going to break the glass and signal our rescue team." "What about the men in the house?" "We pray your father is as good as you think he is." Isabella raised the lamp above her head, counting silently. 1, 2, 3. She smashed the window with the lamp's base, then held the bright bulb outside, flashing it in the pattern James had taught her years ago. 3 long, 3 short, 3 long. SOS in Morse code. Gunfire erupted immediately, bullets splintering the window frame inches from her hands. But the message had been sent, and the helicopter's engine note changed as it banked toward their position. The bedroom door burst open, and Isabella spun to see a man in tactical gear raising an assault rifle toward them. Time slowed to crystalline clarity. She could see his finger tightening on the trigger. Could calculate that she wouldn't be fast enough to shield Kellis from what was coming. Then Rowan appeared behind the gunman like a ghost materializing from darkness. His knife slid between the man's ribs with surgical precision, and the rifle clattered to the floor unfired. "Dad!" Kellis cried, throwing herself into his arms. Rowan held his daughter fiercely, his eyes meeting Isabella's over the girl's head. "Are you both okay?" "We're fine," Isabella said, though her hands were shaking from adrenaline. "James is incoming with air support." "Good, because we're not done yet." Rowan's expression was grim as he moved to the broken window. "Victor's still out there with at least 2 more men, and they're going to make a run for it as soon as they hear that chopper." The helicopter was clearly audible now, its searchlight cutting through the forest canopy. Isabella could see Victor and his remaining men moving toward vehicles parked at the edge of the clearing, their earlier confidence replaced by urgent desperation. "We can't let them escape," Isabella said. "If they get away, they'll just regroup and come after us again." Rowan nodded grimly. "I know, but I won't leave Kellis alone, not even for a few minutes." "Then take me with you," Kellis said firmly. "Absolutely not. Dad, I'm safer with you than without you, and these men aren't going to stop until they're dead or captured. You know that." Isabella watched father and daughter argue with the same stubborn determination, and she realized this was a family trait once the Stravens made up their minds about something they were immovable. "There's another option," Isabella said quietly. "I go after Victor myself." Both Stravens turned to stare at her. "No," Rowan said immediately. "Think about it logically," Isabella continued. "Victor wants me alive. I'm no good to his employers dead. But you're expendable, Rowan. The moment he sees you coming, he'll shoot to kill." "Isabella, you're not a soldier." "No, but I am a negotiator, and I have something he wants." She pulled out the encrypted drive containing the Phoenix protocol. "This ends tonight one way or another." The helicopter's searchlight swept across the cabin, and Isabella could hear James's voice through a loudspeaker. "This is private security. You are surrounded. Throw down your weapons and surrender." The response was immediate gunfire aimed at the aircraft muzzle flashes, lighting up the forest like deadly fireflies. The helicopter banked away from the gunfire, but Isabella could see rappelling ropes dropping from its sides as James's tactical team prepared to fast rope into the clearing. 30 seconds, Rowan said, checking his weapon. When James's team hits the ground, Victor's going to panic. That's when he makes mistakes. Isabella looked at the encrypted drive in her hands, then at Kellis's young face, bright with trust and determination. This girl deserved a future free from the shadows of her father's past, free from the consequences of Isabella's choices. "Rowan," Isabella said softly, "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If something happens to me out there, you take Kellis and you disappear. New identities, new life somewhere. These people can never find you. Nothing's gonna happen to you. Promise me." Isabella's voice carried the authority she'd learned in 1,000 board meetings. "Your daughter's life is more important than revenge or justice or anything else. Promise me you'll put her safety first." Rowan's jaw worked silently for a moment. "I promise. But Isabella, you're not going out there alone." "Yes, I am. Because if we both die, there's no one left to protect her." The helicopter's tactical team hit the ground running their night vision equipment and coordinated movements, immediately shifting the balance of the fight. Isabella could see Victor and his men falling back toward their vehicles, laying down covering fire as they retreated. She stood checking the pistol one final time. "Take care of each other," she said to the Stravens. "And if I don't make it back, know that meeting you both was the best thing that ever happened to me." Before either of them could stop her, Isabella was moving through the cabin toward the front door. Behind her, she could hear Rowan cursing and Kellis calling her name, but she didn't look back. If she did, her courage might fail entirely. The clearing was chaos. James's team advancing with military precision while Victor's men fought a desperate rearguard action. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like strobe lights, and the smell of gunpowder mixed with pine sap hung heavy in the mountain air. Isabella stepped out of the cabin with her hands raised, the encrypted drive visible in her left palm. "Victor!" she called out. "Let's finish this." The gunfire stopped abruptly, as if someone had thrown a switch. Victor emerged from behind one of the vehicles, his weapon trained on her, but his eyes fixed on the drive in her hands. "Ms. Reneth," he said, his cultured accent strained with exhaustion and pain. "You continue to surprise me." "It's over, Victor. Your men are dead or dying and you're surrounded. But I'm willing to make you a deal." Victor's laugh was bitter. "What kind of deal?" "The Phoenix Protocol for safe passage. You take this drive and walk away. My people don't pursue you, and you disappear forever. And Mr. Straven goes free, along with his daughter. No future contact, no retaliation, no loose ends." Victor considered this, his weapon never wavering from center mass on Isabella's chest. "Why would you make such an offer? This technology is worth billions." "Because some things are more important than money," Isabella said simply. "Some people are more important than technology." Something shifted in Victor's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or a grudging respect. "You would sacrifice your company's most valuable asset for a mechanic and his daughter without hesitation." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of choices that would define the rest of their lives. Behind Victor, Isabella could see James's team maintaining their positions, waiting for her signal. "There is, however, one problem with your generous offer," Victor said finally. "What's that?" "My employers did not send me here to negotiate. They sent me to eliminate a problem permanently." Victor's finger tightened on his trigger, and Isabella understood that she had perhaps 3 seconds left to live. In those seconds, her mind didn't flash through memories of her childhood or regrets about her life choices. Instead, she thought about a 12-year-old girl practicing violin and a man who'd risked everything to save a stranger in an alley. If this was how it ended, at least it was for something that mattered. The gunshot cracked across the clearing like thunder. But it wasn't Victor's weapon that fired. Rowan materialized from the forest behind Victor like an avenging angel, his rifle trained on the Russian's back. Victor spun toward this new threat, his own weapon tracking away from Isabella, and that moment of divided attention was all James's team needed. The tactical assault was over in seconds. Victor's remaining men were neutralized with the professional efficiency Isabella had come to expect from James's operatives, and Victor himself was on the ground with zip ties around his wrists before he could fully process what had happened. Isabella stood in the sudden silence, shaking with adrenaline and something that might have been relief. Rowan approached cautiously, his weapon still ready, his eyes scanning for threats that no longer existed. "I thought I told you to stay in the cabin," Isabella said when he reached her side. "Kellis is safe with James's team," Rowan replied. "And I don't abandon my partners." Partners. The word carried weight beyond its simple meaning, encompassing everything they'd become to each other over the past few weeks. "Is it over?" Isabella asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Rowan looked at Victor, who was being loaded into one of James's vehicles with professional efficiency. "The immediate threat is over, But the people who sent him will send others, Isabella finished, unless we give them what they want. She looked down at the encrypted drive still clutched in her palm, then at Rowan's tired but determined face. Or unless we make it clear that coming after us is more trouble than it's worth. What do you mean? Isabella's smile was sharp as a blade. I mean, it's time to remind certain people why Isabella Renneth doesn't make deals from a position of weakness. She walked over to where James was coordinating the cleanup, Rowan falling into step beside her. Whatever came next, they would face it together, the billionaire CEO and the mechanic who'd become her guardian angel, her partner, and if she was being honest with herself, something much more than either of those titles could encompass. The game had changed again, but this time Isabella Renneth was ready to play by her own rules. Kellis appeared at her father's side safe and whole, but with eyes that had seen too much for someone her age. Are the bad men all gone? She asked quietly. Isabella knelt down to the girl's level, meeting her eyes with complete honesty. The ones who are here tonight are gone, but there might be others. Will you protect us from them too? The question was simple, direct, and absolutely devastating in its trust. Isabella looked up at Rowan, seeing her own emotions reflected in his face. Yes, Isabella said firmly. I will protect you both, whatever it takes. Kellis nodded solemnly, then surprised Isabella by stepping forward and wrapping her arms around her in a fierce hug. Thank you, she whispered, for saving my dad, and for not leaving us. Isabella held the girl close, feeling something fundamental shift in her chest. For 34 years, she'd built walls around her heart, convinced that emotional attachment was a luxury she couldn't afford. But holding Rowan's daughter while he watched with eyes full of something deeper than gratitude, those walls didn't just crack, they crumbled entirely. This was what she'd been missing. This was what made everything else worthwhile. The helicopter lifted off 20 minutes later, carrying Victor and his surviving men toward a facility where James would extract every piece of information they possessed about their employers and their operation. Isabella sat between Rowan and Kellis, watching the mountain forest fall away below them, and tried to process everything that had changed in the span of a few hours. She was still holding the encrypted drive containing Phoenix, but its weight seemed different now. Not just a technological breakthrough worth billions of dollars, but a responsibility that extended far beyond corporate profits. What happens now? Rowan asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's engines. Isabella considered the question, thinking about board meetings and hostile takeovers, and the 1,000 daily decisions that comprised her old life. Then she looked at Kellis, who had fallen asleep against her father's shoulder, and at Rowan himself, whose presence had somehow become essential to her happiness. Now, Isabella said, we disappear for a while, somewhere safe, somewhere they can't find us. And then we figure out how to build a life together. Rowan's smile was tired, but genuine. All three of us. If you'll have me, Isabella replied. I know it's complicated, and I know I'm not exactly mother material, but... Isabella, Rowan interrupted gently. Kellis has been asking me for 2 weeks when you were coming to dinner. I think the mother material question has already been answered. Isabella felt tears she hadn't even realized were threatening finally spill over. I love you, she said simply. Both of you. I don't know how it happened so fast, but I do. I love you too, Rowan replied. Have since that first night, if I'm being honest. I just never thought someone like you would want someone like me. Someone like you, Isabella said fiercely, is exactly what I've been looking for my whole life. I just didn't know it until you saved me in that alley. The helicopter banked toward the lights of the city, carrying them away from the mountain cabin, where everything had changed once again. Behind them lay violence and danger, and the remnants of their old lives. Ahead lay uncertainty and challenge, and the possibility of something neither of them had dared to hope for. But they would face it together, the billionaire who'd learned that love was worth more than money, the warrior who'd found someone worth fighting for, and the brave girl who'd helped them both understand that families weren't just born, they were chosen. The war wasn't over. Victor's employers would regroup, strategize, strike again from unexpected angles. But Isabella Renneth was no longer the isolated, emotionally guarded CEO who'd walked into that opera house alley 4 weeks ago. She was part of something larger now, something worth protecting at any cost. And when her enemies came for her again, and they would discover that a woman fighting for her family was far more dangerous than one fighting for profit margins. The game was about to change once more, but this time Isabella had everything she needed to win. 6 months after the mountain cabin, Isabella stood on the terrace of her private island home in the Caribbean, watching Kellis practice violin as the sun painted the horizon in shades of gold and crimson. The melody drifted across the pristine beach where Rowan was teaching a small group of local children basic self-defense techniques, his patient voice carrying on the warm evening breeze. The island, officially called Sanctuary K, had been purchased through a maze of shell corporations that would take even the most sophisticated intelligence agencies years to unravel. It was paradise, but it was also a fortress equipped with the most advanced security systems money could buy, and staffed by a carefully vetted team of former military specialists who understood that their primary mission was protecting a family rather than corporate assets. Isabella's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from James, who was coordinating intelligence operations from a facility in Singapore. The message was brief but significant. Whitmore arrested by Interpol. Financial crimes. Kozlov singing like a canary. The consortium is fracturing. She smiled, remembering the months of careful orchestration that had led to this moment. Rather than hiding indefinitely or surrendering the Phoenix Protocol, Isabella had chosen a third option. She'd declared war on the shadow organization that had threatened her family, using every resource at her disposal to systematically dismantle their operations. The campaign had been fought in boardrooms and back channels rather than mountain forests. Isabella's corporate empire had become a weapon acquiring companies connected to the consortium, exposing financial irregularities, feeding intelligence to law enforcement agencies around the world. Phoenix had never been deployed as a military system. Instead, its artificial intelligence had been repurposed to analyze financial networks, tracking money flows and identifying corruption on a scale that human investigators could never have managed. "You look satisfied," Rowan observed, appearing beside her with the quiet grace that still made her heart skip after all these months. His skin was bronze from the Caribbean sun, and he moved with the relaxed confidence of someone who no longer carried the weight of constant vigilance. "The Blackwater Consortium just lost its primary funding source," Isabella replied, showing him James's message. "Whitmore's arrest triggered a financial audit that's already uncovered connections to arms trafficking and political assassination. By this time next year, most of their leadership will be in prison or exile." Rowan's smile was satisfied, but not vindictive. Justice has a way of catching up eventually. "Justice had help," Isabella corrected. "Sometimes the good guys need to be willing to fight dirty." They watched Kellis finish her practice piece, a complex Bach composition that would have challenged conservatory students twice her age. The girl had thrived in their unconventional family, her natural intelligence flowering under the combined attention of two adults who understood that protecting her meant nurturing her potential rather than sheltering her from reality. "Dad, Isabella," Kellis called out, waving them over to where she'd set up a small concert area on the beach. "I want to play something for you." They walked down to the beach hand in hand, and Isabella marveled at how natural the gesture had become. 6 months ago, she'd barely known how to express affection. Now she couldn't imagine existing without the constant physical connection to the man who'd become the anchor of her new life. Kellis had positioned herself at the water's edge, her violin silhouetted against the darkening sky. When she began to play, Isabella immediately recognized the piece, the same Vivaldi concerto she'd performed the night everything began. But this version was different, richer, infused with the confidence of a young musician who'd found her voice through trial and joy, rather than mere technical mastery. As the final notes faded across the water, Isabella felt tears she'd stopped trying to hide. "That was beautiful, sweetheart." "I've been working on it since we got here," Kellis said carefully, placing her violin in its case. "I wanted to play it perfectly for when we go home." The word home hung in the air like a question. They'd been on the island for 3 months, long enough for the immediate threats to fade and for the new normal to feel genuinely normal. But Isabella knew that hiding in paradise, no matter how perfect, wasn't a sustainable solution for any of them. "Where is home?" she asked gently. Kellis looked between her father and Isabella, her expression serious beyond her 13 years. "Home is wherever we're all together. But I miss New York. I miss Murphy and the garage and my friends at Juilliard." Rowan's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around Isabella's. They'd discussed this possibility many times over the past month, weighing safety against the need for Kellis to have a normal childhood. The dismantling of the consortium had eliminated most of the immediate threats, but there would always be risks associated with Isabella's wealth and prominence. "The penthouse has been completely renovated," Isabella said carefully. "New security systems, private elevator access, enough protection to make Fort Knox jealous. And I've established the Straven Foundation ostensibly to support music education for underprivileged children, but actually to provide security and support for families like ours." "Families like ours?" Rowan asked, raising an eyebrow. Isabella's cheeks warmed. "Unconventional families. People who've been thrown together by circumstances and chosen to stay together by love." The foundation had been her secret project for the past 2 months, a way to channel her resources toward protecting others who might find themselves caught between powerful forces through no fault of their own. The Straven name had been Rowan's suggestion, a way of honoring what they'd built together, while acknowledging that their relationship had fundamentally changed all of them. "I want to go back," Kellis said firmly. "I want to perform at Lincoln Center someday, and I can't do that from a tropical island no matter how beautiful it is." Rowan looked at Isabella, his expression mixing hope with concern. "Are you sure it's safe?" "It's never going to be completely safe," Isabella replied honestly. "But we've eliminated the specific threats against us, and we've built enough protective infrastructure to handle whatever comes next. Besides," she smiled, "I have plans that require us to be in New York." "What kind of plans?" Isabella's smile became mysterious. "The kind that involve making sure Kellis has the perfect venue for her Lincoln Center debut." Over the following weeks, their return to New York felt like stepping into a carefully choreographed dance. Isabella's corporate jet landed at a private airfield where a convoy of armored vehicles waited to transport them directly to the renovated penthouse. The building's security had been upgraded to government levels, with James's team providing round-the-clock protection that was invisible to casual observers, but comprehensive enough to detect threats from miles away. The penthouse itself had been transformed. What had once been Isabella's sterile corporate fortress was now a home designed for 3 people with very different needs and interests. Kellis's room adjoined a music studio equipped with professional recording equipment and soundproofing that would let her practice at any hour. Rowan's workshop occupied what had once been a formal dining room filled with tools and equipment that let him pursue the mechanical projects that kept his hands busy and his mind engaged. But the most significant change was the family room that occupied the penthouse's entire eastern wall, a space designed for conversation and connection with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the city, and comfortable furniture that invited lingering rather than impressive display. "This feels different," Rowan observed on their first morning back, standing in the kitchen while coffee brewed and Kellis practiced scales in her studio. "More like a home than a corporate headquarters." "That was the idea," Isabella replied, leaning against his chest in the easy intimacy they'd developed over months of shared danger and discovery. "I spent 15 years building walls around my life. I wanted to tear them all down." The first few weeks of their return were tentative, all 3 of them readjusting to life in the city while maintaining the close bonds they'd forged in exile. Isabella gradually resumed her corporate responsibilities, but with a different focus. Instead of pure profit maximization, she began steering Reneth Dynamics toward projects that had genuine social impact. The Phoenix Protocol became the foundation for a new initiative in disaster response and humanitarian aid, its artificial intelligence adapted to coordinate relief efforts rather than wage war. Kellis resumed her studies at Juilliard, but with additional security that she accepted with mature understanding. She'd grown during their months away, developing a poise and confidence that impressed her teachers and made Isabella proud in ways she'd never expected to experience. Rowan proved to be the most surprising in his adaptation to their new circumstances. Rather than returning to Murphy's garage, he'd accepted Isabella's offer to head security for the Straven Foundation, a position that let him use his military skills for protection rather than destruction, while maintaining the hands-on work that kept him grounded. "I never thought I'd be comfortable being someone's kept man," he admitted one evening as they walked through Central Park, Kellis practicing a few yards ahead of them with her violin. "You're not a kept man," Isabella replied firmly. "You're my partner, in every sense of the word." "Partner," Rowan repeated thoughtfully. "I like the sound of that." 3 months after their return, Isabella stood before the board of Renith Dynamics with a proposal that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. The boardroom was filled with men and women who'd known her for years, who'd watched her build an empire through ruthless calculation and strategic brilliance. Now she was asking them to approve something that seemed to contradict everything they thought they knew about Isabella Renith. "You want to give away $12 billion, board member Harrison Caldwell said flatly. $12 billion to a foundation that will have no direct return on investment. I want to establish a permanent endowment that will ensure the Straven Foundation can operate indefinitely," Isabella corrected. "The return on investment will be measured in lives protected and families kept together. Some things are more valuable than quarterly profits." The silence that followed was heavy with surprise and calculation. These people had followed Isabella's leadership because she'd made them wealthy, but this proposal challenged their fundamental understanding of why wealth mattered in the first place. Isabella board member Catherine Morrison said carefully, "We understand you've been through a traumatic experience and we're grateful you're safe. But decisions of this magnitude shouldn't be made while you're still processing." "I'm not processing trauma," Isabella interrupted, her voice carrying the authority that had built her empire. "I'm processing growth. For 15 years, I've measured success by the size of my bank account and the fear in my competitors' eyes. But I've learned there are different kinds of power, different kinds of success." She clicked to the next slide in her presentation, showing a photograph of Kellis performing at a small concert hall, her face radiant with joy and concentration. "This is Kellis Straven. She's 13 years old and she plays violin like angels sing. 6 months ago, men tried to kill her to get to me. Today she practices in a studio I built for her, protected by security. I fund planning a future I'm helping her achieve." That transformation from victim to protected child to flourishing young artist, that's the kind of return I want to invest in. The next slide showed before and after photographs of 3 families who'd already benefited from the foundation's early work, people who'd been caught in crossfires between corporate interests, protected and relocated to safety through Isabella's resources and Rowan's expertise. The Straven Foundation has already helped 17 families disappear from dangerous situations and rebuild their lives in safety. We've provided education, housing, security, and hope to people who had nowhere else to turn, and we're just getting started. She could see the board members processing this information, trying to reconcile the Isabella they'd known with the woman standing before them now. The transformation wasn't just philosophical. She looked different, too, softer somehow, as if removing the armor of emotional isolation had allowed her natural warmth to shine through. "The vote is unanimous approval, or I sell my controlling interest and start over somewhere else," Isabella said simply. "I'm not asking for your permission to change my priorities. I'm asking for your partnership in building something bigger than any of us imagined possible." The vote was closer than she'd expected, but it passed. $12 billion moved from corporate assets to philanthropic endowment, ensuring that the Straven Foundation would have the resources to protect vulnerable families for generations to come. After the board meeting, Isabella found Rowan waiting in her office, dressed in the dark suit he wore for formal security consultations, but with an expression of unmistakable pride. "How did they take it?" he asked. "Better than expected. Caldwell threatened to resign, but Morrison talked him out of it. They think I've lost my mind, but they trust me enough to follow where I lead." "Have you lost your mind?" Isabella considered the question seriously. "Maybe. But if insanity means prioritizing love over profit and family over corporate dominance, then I'm completely crazy and completely happy about it." Rowan's smile was warm enough to melt steel. "Then I guess we're both insane." The months that followed were a blur of carefully orchestrated normalcy, punctuated by moments of extraordinary joy. Isabella learned to balance corporate leadership with family life, often working from the penthouse so she could hear Kellis practice and share meals with the people who'd become the center of her world. Rowan adapted to his role as foundation director with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else, building a network of operatives and resources that could respond to threats against vulnerable families anywhere in the world. His military background and Isabella's corporate connections proved to be a devastating combination. They could identify threats, neutralize them, and relocate families with efficiency that amazed even James. But it was Kellis who provided the deepest transformation in all their lives. Watching her father and Isabella navigate their relationship taught her lessons about love and partnership that no classroom could provide, while her own artistic growth reminded both adults that protecting children meant more than keeping them safe. It meant helping them become who they were meant to be. "I've been accepted to the Young Artist program at Lincoln Center," Kellis announced one evening over dinner. Her voice casual, but her eyes bright with excitement. Isabella nearly choked on her wine. "Kellis, that's incredible. The Young Artist program is incredibly competitive and incredibly prestigious." Kellis finished with a grin. "I know. My audition piece was the Bach I've been working on, and apparently they said it was the most technically proficient and emotionally mature performance they'd heard from someone my age." Rowan's pride was visible from across the room. "When do you start?" "Next month. But there's a showcase performance in 6 months where families and supporters get to attend." Kellis looked between them with an expression that was both hopeful and slightly nervous. "I was hoping you both could come. As my parents." The word parents hung in the air like a gift. Isabella had been many things in her life: daughter, student, entrepreneur, CEO, but parent was a title she'd never expected to claim. Now, looking at this remarkable girl who'd chosen to include her in the most intimate category of human relationship, she felt overwhelmed by gratitude and responsibility in equal measure. "Of course we'll be there," Isabella said, her voice thick with emotion. "We wouldn't miss it for anything in the world." "Actually," Rowan said carefully, "there might be something else to celebrate by then." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box that made Isabella's heart stop entirely. In all their months together through danger and exile and the careful rebuilding of their lives, marriage had been an unspoken possibility, floating just beyond conscious acknowledgement. "Isabella Renneth," Rowan said, dropping to one knee beside her chair. "You saved my life the night you walked into that alley. Not because you needed rescuing, but because rescuing you taught me what I was really living for. Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, not the massive diamond a woman of her wealth might have expected, but a simple band of platinum holding a single stone that caught the light like captured starlight. It was elegant, understated, and absolutely right for the woman she'd become. "Yes," Isabella whispered, then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." Kellis erupted in delighted cheers as Rowan slipped the ring onto Isabella's finger, and for a moment, the penthouse felt like the most perfect place in the world, not because of its luxury or security, but because it was filled with the kind of love that made everything else meaningful. The wedding took place 3 months later on the beach at Sanctuary Cay, with only the people who mattered most in attendance. James served as Rowan's best man, while Kellis stood as Isabella's maid of honor, having argued successfully that the traditional gender roles made no sense when the bride was marrying into an existing family unit. The ceremony itself was simple but profound, with vows they'd written themselves that spoke to partnership rather than possession, to choosing each other every day, rather than making promises about an unknowable future. "I promise to protect your dreams while sharing my own," Isabella said, looking into Rowan's eyes while tropical breeze stirred the silk of her dress. "I promise to be your partner in raising Kellis, your ally in facing whatever challenges come, and your sanctuary when the world becomes too much to bear alone. I promise to love the woman you are and support the woman you're becoming," Rowan replied. "I promise to share my strength when you need it and accept yours when I'm weak. And I promise that whatever we face together, we'll never face it alone." When they kissed as husband and wife, Kellis cheered loudly enough to scare tropical birds from the nearby palm trees, and Isabella realized that every choice she'd made, from walking alone through that opera house alley to standing on this beach pledging her life to a man she'd met through violence, had led to this moment of perfect completion. The reception was a joyful chaos of music and dancing that lasted until well after midnight. Isabella danced with her new husband, with her new daughter, with James and Murphy, and the handful of other people who'd helped them build their unconventional family. But the moment she treasured most was when Kellis played violin for the assembled guests, her music floating across the water like a benediction on everything they'd survived and everything they were building together. "Happy?" Rowan asked as they stood on the beach later, watching their daughter practice at the water's edge, while their wedding guests continued celebrating behind them. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Isabella replied. "Content, maybe. Complete. Like I've been walking around missing pieces of myself I didn't even know were gone, and now they've all been found." 6 months later, Isabella sat in the front row of Lincoln Center's Alice Tully Hall, wearing a simple black dress and holding her husband's hand, while their daughter prepared to perform as part of the Young Artists Showcase. The program listed her as Kellis Straven, and seeing their family name in print still gave Isabella a thrill of possessive joy. The audience was filled with music industry professionals, wealthy donors, and the families of young performers. But Isabella only had eyes for the 13-year-old girl who walked onto the stage with poise beyond her years. Kellis had grown during their months of settled family life, gaining confidence and artistic maturity that shone from every gesture. When she began to play the same Vivaldi concerto that had brought them together, but now arranged as a complex piece for violin and piano, Isabella felt tears track down her cheeks without shame. This was the music that had been playing the night everything changed, the night a struggling mechanic had risked his life to save a stranger and inadvertently saved them all. The performance was flawless, but more than that, it was emotionally transcendent. Kellis played like someone who understood that music was a language for expressing things too deep for words, and her interpretation of Vivaldi spoke of family found love chosen and futures bright with possibility. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes, but Isabella barely heard it. She was too busy watching Rowan's face, seeing the pure love and pride that transformed his features as he watched his daughter shine. "She's incredible," Isabella whispered. "She gets that from her mother," Rowan replied, and it took Isabella a moment to realize he was talking about her, not Sarah. The casual inclusion, the assumption that she'd earned that title through love rather than biology, hit her like a physical blow of gratitude. After the performance, they waited in the artist's reception area while Kellis accepted congratulations from teachers, fellow students, and industry professionals. Isabella watched her daughter navigate these conversations with grace and maturity, already comfortable in the spotlight that would likely define much of her adult life. Ms. Straven, a tall, distinguished man, approached them with the kind of confidence that spoke of significant influence. "I'm David Chen from Carnegie Hall. I wanted to personally congratulate Kellis on tonight's performance and discuss some opportunities that might interest your family." Isabella and Rowan exchanged glances. This was the moment they'd prepared, for their daughter's talent was too significant to remain hidden, but increased prominence would mean increased security risks. "What kind of opportunities?" Isabella asked carefully. "We're curating a series of concerts featuring the most promising young classical musicians in America. Kellis's performance tonight suggests she'd be perfect for our opening night. It would be a considerable career opportunity." Isabella looked across the room at Kellis, who was animatedly discussing technique with a renowned violinist twice her age. At 13, their daughter was already talented enough to perform on the world's most prestigious stages, to build a career that could bring joy to millions of people. But she was also still a child who'd been through trauma, who deserved the chance to grow up surrounded by love and safety, rather than constant public scrutiny. "We'll need to discuss it as a family," Rowan said diplomatically. "Kellis's education and well-being come first, but if she's interested in the opportunity—" "Of course," Chen replied, handing Isabella an elegant business card. "Please take all the time you need. Talent like your daughter's is rare, and we're willing to work around whatever constraints are necessary to showcase it properly." As Chen moved away, Isabella realized this was just the beginning. Kellis's talent would create opportunities and challenges they couldn't yet imagine, but they would face them the same way they'd faced everything else together as a family. "Ready to go home?" Rowan asked as the reception began winding down. Isabella looked around the concert hall at the people still discussing Kellis's performance, at the daughter who was already being courted by some of the most influential figures in classical music. A year ago, she would have been calculating advantages and negotiating terms. Now she was simply grateful for the chance to support her daughter's dreams while protecting her childhood. "Home sounds perfect," Isabella replied. The drive back to the penthouse was quiet, all three of them processing the evening's significance. Kellis sat between her parents in the back seat of the armored Mercedes, still glowing from her performance, but tired from the emotional intensity of the evening. "Did you have fun tonight?" Isabella asked. "It was amazing," Kellis replied. "But you know what the best part was?" "What?" "Looking out at the audience and seeing you both there. Mom and Dad together, proud of me." She paused, then added softly, "I never thought I'd have that again after Mom died. A complete family." Isabella's chest tightened with emotion. "You'll always have that, sweetheart. No matter what happens, no matter where your music takes you, you'll always have us. Promise." "Promise," Isabella and Rowan said in unison, and Kellis smiled with the satisfied contentment of a child who knew herself to be absolutely loved. Later, after Kellis had gone to bed and they were alone in their bedroom, Isabella found herself standing at the window looking out at the city lights. New York spread below them like a galaxy, millions of lives intersecting in ways both random and meaningful. "Regrets?" Rowan asked, joining her at the window. Isabella considered the question seriously. A year ago, she'd been one of the most powerful women in America, feared by competitors and courted by politicians, wealthy beyond most people's wildest dreams. Now she was a wife and stepmother, her priorities fundamentally reordered around protecting and nurturing the small family that had become more precious to her than any corporate empire. "Not a single one," she said finally. "Everything I gave up was just preparation for everything I gained." Rowan's arms came around her from behind, and she leaned back against his chest, solid and warm and utterly reliable. Through the walls, they could hear Kellis practicing violin softly in her room. The same Vivaldi piece she'd performed that evening played now just for the joy of the music itself. "I love you," Isabella said into the comfortable darkness. "I love you too," Rowan replied. "Both of you. More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." They stood together in the window, looking out at the city, where their story had begun with violence and terror, where it was continuing with love and hope, and the daily miracle of choosing each other over and over again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Kellis's rising career, the ongoing work of the Straven Foundation, the constant balance between public prominence and private safety. But tonight they were simply a family. A mechanic and a CEO and a 13-year-old prodigy who'd found each other through impossible circumstances and chosen to stay together through love. It wasn't the life any of them had planned, but it was perfect in ways none of them could have imagined. Outside their window, New York hummed with its eternal energy, 8 million people pursuing their dreams and building their futures. But inside the penthouse that had become a home, 3 people who'd learned that the best things in life couldn't be purchased or negotiated. They could only be chosen, protected, and cherished, settled into sleep with the quiet contentment that came from knowing they'd found exactly where they belonged. The story that had begun in a dark alley with a stranger's scream had become a love letter to the transformative power of choosing family over fortune, connection over control, and love over everything else the world had to offer. And if that wasn't a perfect ending, it was at least a perfect beginning for whatever came next. In the morning, there would be breakfast and laughter and the 1,000 small decisions that comprised a life lived in love. There would be board meetings and foundation work and violin practice. There would be security briefings and family dinners and quiet moments stolen between the demands of their public lives. But first, there was this three people who'd found each other through chaos and chosen to stay together through choice, settling into sleep under the protection of the city lights and the promise of tomorrow's possibilities. The Isabella who'd walked alone through that opera house alley was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that true power wasn't about controlling the world around you. It was about loving the people who made that world worth protecting. And as she drifted towards sleep, with her husband's arms around her, and her daughter's music floating through the walls, Isabella Reneth-Straven knew that she'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best way to save yourself is to save someone else first.